Shalom Mashpaka, greetings to you in the name of Yahusha HaMashiach. To all the 12 tribes who are scattered to the ends of the earth, greetings to you. This evening I would like to touch base upon what I've been studying in the past few days on the prophetic order, Genesis 3:15 before Genesis 2:24. So this is the topic today, and just to give you a heads up, it's about the covenant marriage framework. All right, so if you understand what Genesis 3:15 says, that the seed of the woman shall crush your head, and Genesis 2:24 says that for this purpose a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So I'm going to touch base and prove that Genesis 3:15 precedes Genesis 2:24 from a perspective of the woman, the covenant woman. And it'll make sense only once I take you through it, because normally we see the marriage order institution first, and then we see the seed of the woman crushing the serpent's head. But Genesis 3:15 precedes Genesis 2:24. So, in the covenant marriage framework, we see that Yahuah is the husband, Yasharal is his covenant wife. Biblical law, prophetic literature, and covenant theology form a single marital framework that explains divorce, remarriage, and ultimate restoration. So, point one, marriage as covenant. The Creator is the husband of his people. The prophetic marriage language throughout Torah and prophets. Legal structure, Deuteronomy. Torah gives laws for divorce which have legal and prophetic consequences. Point number three, prophetic symbolism. Prophets repeatedly represent Yasharal as a wife who is unfaithful, divorced, and restored. Point number four, polygamy versus covenant. Polygamy means having multiple wives. All right, so polygamy in the narrative is descriptive, what happened, not prescriptive. What should be, practically and prophetically, it produces chaos and judgment. We will see examples in David's house, particularly. Key legal implication, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 1 to 4, shows legal barrier to a divorced woman returning to her first husband. Prophetic solution ultimately is covenantal restoration by the one true husband, who is the Messiah, Mashiach Yahusha. Point number six, marriage and redemption. Marriage after divine intervention. The husband's death, resurrection, new covenant accomplishes what human legal frameworks forbid. And point number seven, scripture reveals a covenantal pattern of the woman, and the covenantal pattern is woman begins from virginhood to marriage to adultery, divorce, childbearing, salvation, and remarriage. All right, so why I said Genesis 3:15 precedes Genesis 2:24 is because the woman fell into adultery. All right, and therefore she will be saved in childbearing, which is Genesis 3:15, and eventually be remarried to the same husband, Genesis 2:24. So the revelation of the pattern is virgin, that is Yasharal's early covenant purity, marriage at Sinai, adultery, idolatry with other mighty ones, divorce as stated in Jeremiah chapter 3 verses 8, saved in childbearing 1 Timothy chapter 2 verses 15, fulfilled when Messiah came through Yasharal, and remarried to the same husband in his second estate or resurrection. So Deuteronomy chapter 24 verses 1 to 4 says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency, the Hebrew words are iram, okay, which is the Torah phrase, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house and becomes another man's wife, and the latter husband hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house. or if the latter husband dies who took her to be his wife, then a former husband who has sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before Yahuwah, and you shall not bring sin upon the land that Yahuwah your Elohim is giving you for an inheritance. So, the fall of the covenant woman, who is Yasharel, especially the northern kingdom, Ephraim or Samaria, represented by Samaritans, is prophetically portrayed as a covenant wife who went into adultery through idolatry, was divorced, and walked a death path. And her death path was the exile, the Assyrian exile, syncretism. So, point number one, prophetic accusations. So, uh, Hosea, Yermayahu, Ezekiel, they all uh, portray Yasharel as a faithless wife, harlot, and divorced. The Assyrian exile, the historical removal of the 10 tribes, which is recorded in 2nd Kings chapter 17, created the lost tribe situation. Resettlement, Assyrian policy of moving peoples into Yasharal's territory, 2nd Kings 17:24. Later kings such as Asharaddon, who was an Assyrian king, you know, historically recorded bringing peoples back. Okay, the Assyrian inscriptions, biblical references to Samaritans later. So he resettled uh, some people, okay, from these tribes back into the northern territory. And Samaritan origin, Samaritans are the mixed population in Samaria, which is the Yasharalite remnant plus foreign settlers, because the text says in scripture that when the Assyrian king right exiled the 10 tribes, uh, so he brought some foreign settlers and he put them in their land, and later on Asharadon restores some of the Yasharalite remnant back into these places. Okay, so that is the historical background. And the prophetic pattern is divorce, wandering in uncleanliness, consequences of death, past oppression, loss of covenant identity. So when Yasharel went into captivity, they lost their covenant identity, they lost their tribes and their inheritance. So, few scriptures to read. Hosea chapter 2, verses 2 to 3. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband, that she put away her whoredom from her face and her adultery from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and set her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness, and set her like a parched land, and kill her with thirst. Hosea chapter 3, verses 1. And Yahuwah said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as Yahuwah loves the people of Yasharel, though they turn to other mighty ones and love raisin cakes. 2nd Kings chapter 17, verses 6 and 17, verses 24. In the ninth year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the people of Yasharel away into Assyria and placed them in Hala on the harbor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. Then the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon and Kutha and Ava and Hamath and Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Yasharel, and they took possessions of Samaria and lived in its cities. Yermayahu chapter 3, verses 1. They say, if a man puts away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's, shall he return to her again? Would not that land be greatly polluted? You have played the whore with many lovers, and would you return to me? Declares Yahuwah. So these are the supporting texts which I just read, okay, for us to understand the fall of the covenant woman. Okay, and because of her harlotry, she was carried away into captivity. She lost her covenant identity, and as a result, as I read in the previous slide, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 to 4, eventually Jeremiah 3, verses 8, which I says that Yahuah put her away with a certificate of divorce. And he also begins with Jeremiah chapter 3, recorded in Jeremiah chapter 3, verses 1, that if a man puts away his wife and becomes another man's, shall he return to her again? So he says that, would you want to return back to me? Okay, so Yahuwah cannot take Yasharal, divorced Yasharal back to him as stated in the Torah commandment, and Yahuwah will never go against his Torah commandment. So there has to be a framework, a covenant marriage framework, which we will see as we move along. Okay, and how Yahuwah in his wisdom fulfilled this framework. Now, a little bit to touch base upon the Altaschith Psalms. All right, Altaschith in Hebrew means El, do not destroy. Okay, so the core claim is the four Psalms, which is Psalms 57, 58, 59, and Psalm 75, are headed with the cry Lama Netzach El Taskit. All right, Altaschith. So Lama Netzach El Taskit. Okay, it's mentioned in all these four psalms. Okay, of the covenant wife threatened with destruction. So these psalms encapsulate the desperation and plea for preservation that fit the prophetic wife image, where we see in the Davidic peril, national peril, the remnant peril. So four occurrences in these psalms, all right, all have the superscription Lamanatsak el Taskit. All right, so the literal or grammatical reading of al is actually a negative participle, which means do not. Okay, and what is interesting to see is the same word al is also used as el, okay, which is for Elohim, a short form for Elohim. And taskit comes from the root word shakat, all right, which means destroy or spoil, and therefore el taskit means do not destroy. So the deeper root echoes the consonant suggests layered imagery identified, where el, okay, I just told, is a short form for Elohim, and the root word, there is one more root word, taish. All right, taish, it means goat. All right, which is an echo of taskit. Okay, cut, which means broken or terror, and shakat, which means, or shakit as they say, which means destroy. So the prophetic resonances of sacrifice, brokenness, and threat. So the context is each psalm's historical situation. David is hunted. In when you read Psalms 57, 59, he's hunted by Shaul, and the people also tend to deliver him up to Shaul, but through miraculous intervention by Yahuwah, he escapes each time. Okay, and a plea against unjust rulers. This is where we see where those unjust judges or rulers, they come against David to hunt him. Okay, and Asaf's national lament or assurance. So Psalm 75 is not of David, is the Psalm of Asaph, where he talks about national lament and assurance. Okay, so the function of El Taskit, liturgical instruction and prophetic cry, it designates survival, preservation, withholding of destruction, and is a prayer. It's actually a prayer to Yahuwah that Elohim do not destroy. Right? So the Revelation link, this cry is analogous to the Revelation 12 woman and to the Philadelphia Assembly's promise, Altaschith, as assembly level cry. So when you read Psalms 57 verses 1, this is mentioned to the chief musician Altaschith, do not destroy, michtam of David, when he fled from Shaul in the cave. Be merciful unto me, O Elohim, be merciful unto me, for my soul trusted in thee. Yea, in the shadow of thy wings will I make my refuge until these calamities be overpast. We read in Psalms 58 verses 1, to the chief musician Altaschith, do not destroy, michtam of David, do you indeed speak righteousness, O congregation, do you judge uprightly, O ye sons of men? Psalms 59, verses 1 to the chief musician Altaschith, again, which means do not destroy, michtam of David, when Shaul sent and they watched the house to kill him. Deliver me from my enemies, O my Elohim, defend me from them that rise up against me. Psalms 75 verses 1 to the chief musician Altaschith, a psalm or song of Asaph. Unto thee, O Elohim, do we give thanks unto thee. Do we give thanks for that thy name is near, thy wondrous works declare. I'm sorry I took these verses from the King James Version because of lack of time, and as a result I couldn't change, but I read it out as Elohim and not as Gad. Okay. So in my previous study, I already touched based upon michtam and eduth. Michtam is a golden engraving and a testimony. Eduth is a testimony. So Psalm 60 is where I brought forth an exposition. You may go and read that study on Psalms chapter 60. All right, where I've shown how even the gematria value of michtam is 500 and it equals to Eduthkha, which is 500. All right, so Eduthkha means my testimony. Okay, so the Psalm 60 subscription combines, it reads as Eduth michtam of David to teach, all right, which is le lemad. All right, so it's teaching the michtam, all right, to the coming generations so that they remember of covenant faithfulness, to remain in covenant faithfulness, without which, all right, severe judgment, chastisement, or wrath, whatever you call it, comes upon Yasharel. So the prophetic is teaching transfers the engraved revelation into Elohim's testimony in the community. The symbolic reading of 500 is 5 into 100, where number 5 talks about covenant or grace, Pentecost or hand of Elohim. 100 speaks about fullness or sealing. So 500 signifies a sealed covenant revelation becoming the communal testimony. So the practical result, the covenant woman's inner engraved truth, which is the michtam, becomes the community's testified identity, Eduthkha, when taught and received. So all these things are written. It means it's a simple interpretation. All these things are written for our admonition. Okay, so for us to be warned of what happened to Yasharel historically, all right, will happen to us if we are not in covenant faithfulness. It is a very clear call out to the Eduthkha, right, which is my testimony, because the teaching of what has happened to Yasharel, all right, is being brought down to us as a warning that we need to remain in the covenant faithfulness or we come under that severe judgment. Because if you see Le Lamad, all right, is the gematria value I touched base in my previous study 104, and 104, all right, has got all right, the teaching, all right, which means to teach. So you have to teach what uh, historically happened to Yasharel. Psalms chapter 60 verses 1 to the chief musician upon Shushan Neduth michtam of David to teach when he strove with Aram Nahariam and with Aram Zoba when Joab returned and smote of Edom in the valley of Salt 12,000. O Elohim, thou hast cast us off, thou hast scattered us, thou hast been displeased, O turn thyself to us again. Right, I won't touch base upon Psalms chapter 60 again, but I will definitely brush up on what michtam means. Right, so as I already stated, that it is a golden engraving, having a testimony. Okay, now let's turn and look to the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. All right, we'll see the 5, 6, and 7 husband pattern. So, the Samaritan woman is the personal face of the divorced, adulterous covenant wife, who is Northern Yasharel. The 5 husbands plus the current not your husband plus the 7th Yahusha form a prophetic 5, 6 7 pattern, which is Torah, carnal man to Messiah. All right, so the geography and tribal claim, Jacob's well is at Shechem, and Shechem territory is associated with Ephraim and Manasseh. Joshua's allotment, Joshua 24 verses 32. Samaria's population was mixed post exile. Historical background, I already shared with you the Assyrian exile, 2 Kings chapter 17 verses 6 and 24. We already read these verses, and later resettlement or syncretism produced the Samaritans, Yasharalite remnant plus foreign influence. We saw that when Assyrian king carried them captive, he resettled some foreign people from his land into uh, these places, and Asharadon, his son, later on brings many of them back, into this place. So it's a mixed population, all right, which is that's the reason they were looked down upon. The Samaritans were looked down upon, and Yahusha came to save and seek the lost. He came to this place, met this Samaritan woman, and eventually that whole town, all right, turned to Mashiach. Okay, so John chapter 4 encounter as prophetic dramatization. The woman's 5 husbands symbolize spiritual history, broken Torah practice of false husbands. The current man is not her husband, which means an earthly or carnal man, and the 7th husband is Yahusha, the true heavenly husband. So the restoration sequence, the recognition I am, leads to the covenant restoration. The woman becomes a witness to her town after meeting Yahusha. The typological link, Samaritan woman's story, models wider Yasharal's repentance and restoration and parallels Revelation 12 and Philadelphia. So Joshua 24 verses 32, all right, connects the city of Shechem to the family of Joseph, stating that the bones of Joseph were buried there in the parcel of ground purchased this land, uh, which became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. While the city of Shechem was within Ephraim's territory, the land itself was a special inheritance for the descendants of Joseph, who are Ephraim and Manasseh. And Manasseh's clans also had a historical connection to the general area, explaining the overlap, which is mentioned in Joshua chapter 17, verses 2. This city was ultimately allotted to the tribe of Ephraim, who was Manasseh's brother, and Joshua chapter 20 verses 7 states that Shechem was in the hill country of Ephraim, and Joshua 21:21 confirms it was a Levitical city given to the Kohathites from the territory of Ephraim. So the supporting verses, I'll read out Joshua chapter 24 verses 32. And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Yasharel had brought up out of Mizraim, they buried at Shechem, the plot of the ground which Jacob had brought from the sons of Chamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 kesita, and which had become an inheritance of the children of Joseph. Ezra chapter 4 verses 1 and 2. This is a proof where Esarhaddon, the sovereign of Ashur or Assyria, resettled some of these tribes back, and this is what they tell Zerubbabel and Ezra and the people who are in the covenant, who came to build the temple, and these are the people who are there who are telling them, saying, I'll read from verse 1. And when the adversaries of Yehuda and Binyamin heard that the sons of the exile were building the Hekal, that is the temple of Yahuah, Elohim of Yasharel, verse 2, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, let us build you with you, for we seek your Elohim as you do, and we have slaughtered to him since the days of Esarhaddon, sovereign of Ashur, that is Assyria, who brought us here. So these people are saying that, see, now we are no longer abominable. We are no longer, sacrificing to golden calves or other gads or mighty ones, but we are now slaughtering to Yahuah, our Elohim, since the days Esarhaddon, sovereign of Assyria, who brought us here. So this is the claim that they make. which is a proof of the text. And what we are talking about is the Samaritan woman, the same woman from this area, from Samaria. All right. John chapter 4, verses 18. For you have had five husbands. This is Yahusha telling her that she has five husbands, and the one whom you have now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. So, verse 25 and 26, the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, the one who is called anointed. When that one comes, he shall announce to us all. Yahusha said to her, I am who am speaking to you, am he. I who am speaking to you am he. So the Samaritan woman representing the Samaritan is a perfect example of being put away five times by five different husbands until she landed to a man in a living relationship into a continuous spiritual adultery until she met Yahusha, the true husband, who restores Samaritans into a marriage relationship to himself as incorporating them into the covenantal seed. All right, so uh, she's a very perfect example because when we read Deuteronomy 24, if a husband finds indecency in his wife, all right, we saw the words, right, erim, all right, so when he sees indecency, which means fornication or adultery in her, he puts her away. Okay, just imagine this woman was put away five times. All right, five different husbands, and now she's landed to a sixth man who is not even a husband. And until she meets Yahusha, the true husband, who restores her into a marriage relationship to himself spiritually, as incorporating her and all the Samaritans into the covenantal seed. Right, so this is the picture that we see in the Samaritan woman. So the question arises, which commandment did Yahusha fulfill first? So Yahusha fulfilled, like I said, Genesis 3:15, which is redemption, before he fulfilled Genesis 2:24, marriage. Because the covenant woman must first be redeemed from the serpent's curse before she can be restored as a wife to a true husband. So this is what we need to first understand. So the covenant woman is under the curse of Genesis 3:15. She is divorced, unclean, barren, and walking a death path. Before marriage can be restored, the curse must be broken. So Yahusha first appears as the seed of the woman to crush the serpent's head. Genesis 3:15. So the serpent's authority over the woman must end. Her heel wound must be healed. Uh, the death sentence must be uh, reversed. This is the first work Yahusha fulfills. Alright, the seed of the woman will crush the serpent. So only after redemption can Genesis 2:24 be restored. A woman cannot marry while legally defiled. We saw the Deuteronomy chapter 24 rule, right? She cannot cleave to a husband until her impurity is removed. Redemption precedes union. Therefore, Genesis 2:24 becomes second. So Yahusha becomes the seventh husband after he has redeemed her. Where we read, you have had five husbands. The one you now have is not your husband. The seventh one is Yahusha, but only after he fulfills Genesis 3:15. Now you will say that Yahusha was already born, right? And the Samaritan woman, all right, how can Yahusha come from her womb? But spiritually, he definitely can if you understand that, just as you and me, if we are incorporated into the covenantal seed, so we become part of that woman from whose womb Yahusha sprang forth. All right, so this is the spiritual principle that we need to first understand, and after we are, uh, you know, come forth, uh, you know, betrothed to Yahusha. All right, he's come forth from the covenantal womb or our womb. He has come forth. Okay, now we are betrothed to him into a covenantal marriage. The marriage has spiritually happened, but physically it yet has to happen because the marriage. Remember, it says about the marriage supper of the Lamb. So it's a consummation of the marriage, which is yet to happen. Spiritually, it has happened. Okay, so I hope you understand the commandment. All right, is ruach in the letter. So the ruach commandment, the betrothal, the covenantal. I'm sorry, Genesis 3:15. Uh, the seed of the woman has come forth to crush Satan's head. But has Satan's head been crushed? Yes, it has spiritually by Yahusha. But has it been crushed by you? No. That's why the scripture says that he will soon, make make Satan to be crushed under your foot. There is a scripture also about it. I'm just reminded of it. So I don't know where it is, but it definitely says that that he will crush Satan under your foot. So that is yet to happen, right? Because that is when we are transformed into his body. All right, that's the time when sin is completely eradicated, and Satan is crushed. He no longer has any access to our body as he has now in our thought pattern, in temptations, in putting us into sin. He will have no access at all. Okay, and similarly, at that same time when we are transformed, we are in the marriage supper of the Lamb. The consummation of the marriage happens. So you see how beautifully, in the wisdom of Yahuah has embedded all this in the scripture, the Ruach in the letter. I hope you understand the prophetic order. All right, the redemption and then the marriage. Okay, so crushing the serpent, redeeming the woman. From Yahusha's perspective, it is already done because he represents us. But for us, it has yet to happen. That's the reason each time we plea the Altaschith, I'm sorry, we say, El, do not destroy, save me. All right, save me from my enemies. So, because Satan is chasing us, right, to put us down, to put us into sin, to try to destroy our salvation. But he won't be successful because we are chosen by the Lamb. We are redeemed by his blood, washed by his blood. Even though you may partially keep falling down, but you will not fall down completely. He will lift you up, though through much chastisement, because if he didn't spare Yasharel, even the covenant Yasharel went through exile, isn't it? Along with the physical Yasharel, they too were affected. So you too will be affected, because until the final separation happens of the wheat and the tares, which will happen shortly. Okay, so crushing the serpent, redeeming the woman, Genesis 3:15 precedes Genesis 2:24, rejoining the woman to a true husband. This matches all prophetic patterns, Hosea 2, Jeremiah 3, and Ezekiel 16. This is why Yahusha comes first as Redeemer, then as the bridegroom. First he dies and rises to free her from the curse, then he restores the marriage covenant forever. Yahuah protected the covenant line even when multiple wombs corrupted it, even when men spread their seed into many women, introducing rival sons, polluted genealogies, pagan mixtures, violent and immoral lineages. Yahuah personally intervened to keep the covenant seed set apart and unbroken. Okay, Genesis 3:15, and I put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall crush your head, and you shall crush his heel. Okay, this is Yahusha's first mandate: crush the serpent, redeem the woman. Genesis 2:24, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Only fulfilled after healing and restoration. Yahusha fulfills Genesis 3:15 first as the redeemer, and then Genesis 2:24 as the husband. Redemption always precedes marriage. Okay, which commandment did Yahusha fulfill first? It's a continuation slide. So I will give examples to point number 7, where I said Yahuah protected the covenant line even when multiple wombs corrupted it. Okay, so if you see Lamech, all right, who was the first polygamist, he was the first man to have two wives. All right, he introduced violence and murder into human culture. Then we see the example of Abraham. Abraham was promised that he would have a seed, okay, from Yahuah, but because Sarah was barren and she past her age, she forced him to marry Hagar, her maid, and through this marriage, all right, his seed went into uh, Hagar's womb, bringing forth the bond son Ishmael. Okay, so then we have scripture recording that Abraham sends all his other sons away. Even after Sarah died, he married Keturah. All right, had sons from her as well. And it scripture records he sends all his sons away from Ishak, including the bond son Ishmael. For Yahuah said, "In Ishak shall your seed be called." Okay, so this is what we need to understand. Jacob's 12 sons, came from 4 women, creating massive rivalry. Even though the household is morally chaotic, Yahuwah handpicks the covenant branches to fulfill his will. So Yahuwah chooses Levi for priesthood, Joseph's son Ephraim for completeness of nations, Genesis 48:19, and Yehuda for Melchizedek priesthood and kingship, Genesis 49. Okay, so uh, this is what happens, but ultimately Yahuwah is the one, all right, who handpicks his covenant seed. Then we see Yehuda. uh, Yehuda sleeps with his daughter-in-law by accident, Genesis chapter 38. Yet Yahuwah miraculously chooses parrots, uh, all right, chooses parrots, Zerah, to keep the Torah of the dead brother commandment, which Yehuda failed in keeping, as Shelah was not given to her. So if you see, Yehuda was immoral. He went thinking that he wanted to sleep with a prostitute. Okay, and unknowingly, all right, because he did not give his son Sheila, because his firstborn was evil, was killed. Onan did not fulfill the Torah of the dead brother. He spilled his seed on the ground. So Yahuwah killed him as well. So maybe he was afraid that Shelah would die through too. So though he promised Shelah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, he failed to give her. So she had no other option but to take seed directly from Yehuda, and that's how we see Peretz and Zerah born to her from a womb. But look at Yehuda, his immorality. All right, is all mentioned in the scripture. All right, but still Yahuwah forgives his people, and uh, he allows the Torah of the dead brother commandment to be kept. All right, which Yehuda failed in keeping, as Sheila was not given to her, and chooses parrots. What a wisdom of Yahuwah, the mercy of Yahuwah in doing that. Then we see Joseph. All right, let's take the example of Joseph. Joseph married a pagan priest's daughter, Asenath, Genesis 41 verses 45, which was circumstantial, as there was no covenantal seed dwelling in Egypt when he was exalted to a governor's position. It was a survival context, not rebellion. Yahuwah incorporated his sons into Yasharel based on his covenantal faithfulness, but didn't spare his seed later as they went through judgment for covenant unfaithfulness. Shalomo had an option. In contrast to Joseph, Shalomo had an option to take a covenantal wife because he lived in covenant land and surrounded by covenant families, but he took Pharaoh's daughter to be his wife. 1 Kings chapter 3 verses 1. Yahuwah did not incorporate Solomon's foreign sons into the covenant in a privileged way. Instead, he tore the kingdom from Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 11. And the messianic line bypasses Solomon, going instead through Nathan, another son of Bathsheba, as we can see in the Luke's genealogy, Luke chapter 3 verses 31. The messianic throne cannot come through Solomon because his line is corrupted by polygamy and idolatry. Therefore, Yahuwah chooses Nathan, another son of Bathsheba, bypassing Solomon's corrupted line. What about Elkanah? Elkanah had 2 wives, right? Hannah and Peninnah. And Peninnah oppressed Hannah because she was childless. So rival wombs bring rivalry. That's what it means. Polygamy brings rivalry. Yasharel as a nation. Okay, Yasharel commits spiritual adultery with many lovers. Jeremiah chapter 3 verses 1 to 9. We read this, right? But Yahuwah keeps a remnant seed alive. Yeshayahu chapter 10 verses 20 to 22 to preserve the covenantal line. So the final intervention we see is the virgin birth. No human seed line remained uncorrupted. The seed line which was preserved as covenantal remnant couldn't bring forth the Mashiach ensuring absolute purity. Hence he fulfilled sorry Hence he fulfilled Genesis 3:15 and 1 Timothy chapter 2 verses 15 when Elohim himself overshadows Miriam, as stated in Luke chapter 1 verses 35, and redeems a womb by bringing forth a son bearing his entire person. Miriam was a type of a covenantal woman travailing in birth pangs to bring forth the male child, as stated in Revelation chapter 12. He's a type. So, in every single case, polygamy produced hostility, rivalry, idolatry, or corruption. Never once did Yahuah call it good or favored. Okay, now the return of the divorced wife. So, legal and prophetic solution. So, the core claim is Torah forbids return after remarriage. We read in Deuteronomy chapter 24. Prophetic literature anticipates restoration by the husband himself, as we read in Hosea and Jeremiah. Yahusha's death and resurrection and new covenant uh, enact a legal prophetic remedy for the divorced wife. Only the true husband can restore. So the first point is Deuteronomy 24 legal barrier prevents a civil remarriage to first husband. Remedy was only with Elohim. Second is the prophetic promise. Hosea chapter 2 and chapter 3 portray the that Yahuah purchasing and restoring the unfaithful wife. Jeremiah 3 shows Elohim's readiness to receive Yasharel back even though she is adulteress, and questions her, do you want to come back to me? Alright. But he can't. The bottom line is he can't, because the commandment stated by him in Deuteronomy chapter 24 verses 1 to 4 says that if a woman is divorced from her husband and marries another, she cannot come back to her first husband. Very clear, isn't it? And here is very so many people, they stumble at this commandment, and they don't see a renewed commandment, but they see as new, everything is new, as though the Yasharel is completely destroyed and is a whore now, cannot come back to Yahuah. Therefore, Yahuah shifts his paradigm to Gentiles as the church without understanding the Abrahamic covenant. I won't get into the details, but there are people teaching this kind of doctrine. So, point number 3 is the new covenant legal mechanism. Yahuah, in his transition second estate as Yahusha, through the paschal work, which is the death and resurrection, and his priestly and kingly authority, reset the legal status. The husband's own action, not human legal maneuvering, accomplishes true remarriage, a workaround solution for Deuteronomy chapter 24 verses 1 to 4, where the husband and wife remain the same and yet are different in state. That is, they are renewed. The husband and wife, they remain same. The same husband is getting married to the same wife. The only thing is that they are renewed. They are in different estates now. So such a wisdom of Elohim, and so much love at the same time, so much love for his bride or his wife, you can say. So I'll be reading selective verses from Hosea chapter 2 verses 14 to 23. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her, and there I will give her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a door of hope, and there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt. And in that day declares Yahuah, you will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me my master. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know Yahuah. Jeremiah 3 verses 14. Return, O faithless people, declares Yahuah, for I am your husband. I will take you, one from a city and two from a clan, and I will bring you to Zion. Romans chapter 7 verses 1 to 4. Shawl's marriage or letter analogy about law and new union? Or do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to you, speaking to those who know the law, that the law is binding on a person only as long as he lives. Accordingly, my brothers, you also have died to the law through the body of Mashiach, so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for Elohim. Ephesians chapter 5 verses 25 to 27. Husbands, love your wives as Mashiach also did love the assembly and gave himself for it, in order to set it apart and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. Verse 27, in order to present it to himself a splendid assembly, not having spot or wrinkle or any of this sort, but that it might be set apart and blameless. The example of Philadelphia, the restored covenant woman, or at the core claim, the letter to Philadelphia, Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 to 13 is where we read what Yahusha tells this assembly. All right, it's a corporate Altaschith, all right, the assembly version of the covenant woman who is weak but faithful, protected by the key of David, given an open door, guarded from the hour of trial, and written upon michtam. All right, the vulnerability is that you have little strength, matches David's hunted weakness and the covenant woman's broken state. Faithfulness, you have kept my word and not denied my name, the defining mark of the remnant wife. All right, the remnant of wife. Uh, Key of David, authority to open and close, legal, messianic, uh, prerogative, authority to preserve or destroy, open door, Altaschith, divine reversal, where destruction was imminent, an open door of escape appears, all right, and guarding from the hour of trial, parallel to Psalm's deliverances, michtam and Eduthkha fulfillment. I will write on him the name of my Elohim and my new name, which is an inscription imagery, which is a michtam. All right, so the passages I will read out is Revelation from Revelation chapter 3. And to the messenger of the assembly in Philadelphia write, he who is set apart, he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens, says this. Verse 8, I know your works. See, I have set before you an open door, and no one is able to shut it, that you have little power, yet have guarded my word, and have not denied my name. Verse 9, see, I am giving up those of the congregation or synagogue of Satan who say they are Yehudim and are not, but lie. See, I am making them come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you. Verse 10, because you have guarded my word of endurance, I also shall guard you from the hour of trial, which shall come upon all the world to try those who dwell on the earth. Verse 11, see, I am coming speedily. Hold what you have, that no one take your crown. Verse 12, he who overcomes, I shall make him a supporting post in the dwelling place of my Elohim, and he shall by no means go out, and I shall write on him the name of my Elohim and the name of the city of my Elohim, the renewed Jerusalem, which comes down out of the heaven from my Elohim, and my renewed name. Verse 13, he who has ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. So Revelation 12, the travailing woman, and the core claim is Revelation 12 is the cosmic presentation of the covenant woman, travailing in persecution, giving birth to the man child Yahusha, uh, who's in a flight and is in a wilderness preservation. All motifs that echo Altaschith and the michtam Eduthkha transformation. So the woman gives birth to the man child. Okay, again we see the covenant woman over here bringing forth Mashiach. All right, dragon persecutes. He resists the birth of the seed. So through Herod, he tries to kill the child. When unsuccessful, he is the same persecuting force that drives the wife into the wilderness. It's like a death path imagery where he's chasing her and her seed, remnant of her seed, into bringing them into captivity or destroying them. Flight and preservation. The woman is protected and provisioned as she was to be delivered in childbearing. 1 Timothy 2 verses 15. Altaschith is answered. Remnant described those who keep the commandments of Elohim and have the testimony of Yahusha, as stated in Revelation 12 verses 17, which is the Eduthkha motif. And numerical overlap. Eduthkha 500 is equal to testimony of Yahuah, which is equal to michtam, the engraved blessing, both manifest in the remnant's identity. We can read a few scriptures from here, which says Matthew 2:16, then Herod, having seen that he was fooled by the Magi, was greatly enraged, and he sent forth and slew all the male children in Bethlehem and in all its borders from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had exactly learned from the Magi. 1 Timothy 2 verses 15, but she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in belief and love and set apartness with sensibleness, as Shaul, reiterates that the woman, who's the woman? The covenant woman will be saved in childbearing when she bears Mashiach. And Mashiach came from the covenant womb, isn't it? And that's how the woman is saved and restored and betrothed to himself, who is going to come as a bridegroom, all right, to consume the marriage. What a beautiful plan. Revelation chapter 12 verses 1 to 6. And a great sign was seen in the heaven, a woman clad with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And being pregnant, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign was seen in the heaven, and see a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head, and his tail draws a third of the stars of the heaven and throws them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth to devour her child as soon as she is born. And she bore a male child who was to shepherd all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught away to Elohim and to his throne. Verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by Elohim to be nourished there for 1260 days. And then verse 17 says, and the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to fight with the remnant of her seed, those guarding the commandments of Elohim and possessing the witness of Yahusha, Messiah. Now, remember, I told you Mary was a type of this covenant woman, all right, and she was not the only covenant woman, all right. I've heard some people, talking that Revelation 12 is Mary, okay, and the child, because it says the man child coming from the womb is Yahusha, and they glorify Mary. So I'm not teaching Maryism. I'm sorry, my friend, you've got it all wrong. She's a covenant woman, all right, and Mary was part of that covenant woman who was chosen in virgin birth to bring forth the man child. Okay, so because to show and fulfill the promise that was given, that she shall be saved in childbearing, not only Mary but the whole covenant woman, including you and me, to be saved in childbearing, because through our through us Mashiach was born and is being born, because we bring forth the Mashiach likeness in our walk with him in the Ruach. So that's what it means. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is, if you understand, the woman was clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and head of crown of 12 stars. 12 talks about 12 tribes, 12 apostles of the Lamb, sun, moon, and 12 stars. If you remember, Joseph had a dream of the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowing down to him. He himself was the 12th star, talking about Yasharel bowing down to him, which was fulfilled in Yasharel, coming into Egypt when he is the governor of Egypt and next to Pharaoh, and they all bow down to him. Okay, so this is a picture of the covenant woman, okay, in the wilderness. So it is, the traveling woman is that covenant woman. Now, polygamy refutation woven into the whole narrative. This is very important for us to understand the marriage principle. So the core claim is Elohim forbade Yasharal's kings to multiply wives and silver and gold. Polygamy and wealth accumulation in royal house produced spiritual corruption and political collapse. Solomon violated the command. His many wives turned his heart to idolatry. His lineage became compromised, and Yahuwah used Nathan and the prophetic covenant to re establish Elohim's house and the Davidic line despite that corruption. So the divine royal restriction, Elohim gives explicit instructions for the king: do not multiply horses, wives, or greatly increase silver and gold. This is a preventive law against pride, idolatry, and political dependence. You can read that in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 16 to 17. Purpose of the restriction: multiple wives, bring foreign mighty ones and cultic influence into the royal court. Excess wealth fosters self reliance, oppression, and idolatrous alliances. The law protects the covenant structure and the purity of worship. Solomon's explicit failure: Solomon loved many strange women and had a multiplicity of wives and concubines. He accumulated great silver and gold and horses beyond measure. His heart was turned away by his foreign wives to follow other mighty ones, exactly what the Torah warned would happen. 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 1 to 8, 1 Kings chapter 10 14 to 29. You may read these verses. The domestic and the national consequences: the king's wives introduced foreign worship and provoked idolatry in the palace. Idolatry at the top led to national apostasy and eventual political fracturing, where the north and the south split. Elohim raised adversaries and judgment because of the king's unfaithfulness. Solomon's origin and moral complication: Solomon is born to Bathsheba, who was formerly the wife of Uriah the Hittite. We can read that in 2 Samuel chapter 11. David's taking of Bathsheba and arranging Uriah's death violated covenant justice and the Torah's spirit. David was rebuked by Nathan. This origin is part of the moral stain on the royal line that required prophetic correction. Uh, the next point: the Levirate or brother law background Torah context. The Torah contains rules about the deceased brother and widow. Deuteronomy chapter 25 verses 5 to 10. To preserve lineage, David's conduct bypassed covenant protections. The royal house's moral credit was damaged. Nathan's prophetic function: correction and reconstruction. Nathan confronted David over Uriah and Bathsheba, 2 Samuel chapter 12, and pronounced consequences, but Elohim preserved a remnant and promised the Davidic covenant. Later, Nathan acted to secure Solomon's succession, 1 Kings chapter 1, okay, thereby re-establishing the house despite corruption. Yahuah accomplishes covenant purposes through prophetic correction. Prophetic lesson against polygamy. Narrative pattern: polygamy in royal context brings rape, rebellion, and succession crisis, like Ammon and Tamar. All right, Absalom, Tamar, and Absalom. If you remember, Ammon was a cousin of Tamar and Absalom, and he rapes Tamar, humbles her because she is beautiful, and he's sexually attracted to her, and then hates her and puts her away. As a result, Absalom kills Ammon. So when I say cousin, they were from multiple wombs of the same father. David was their father. So you see, polygamy in royal context brings rape, rebellion, and succession crisis. So the prophetic ideal is one husband, one bride, which is covenant fidelity. The king's multiplication of wives is a typological betrayal of the covenant. Polygamy refutation. This slide is continued, woven into the whole narrative. The ninth point is restoration path. Elohim uses prophets, covenant promises, and judgment or grace cycle to prune and rebuild. Uh, like Nathan's confrontation, the Davidic covenant, the ultimate redeemer. The messianic resolution is a single true husband, Yahusha, who restores the bride and corrects royal failure. All right, he's the king of kings, and he corrects the royal failure because he marries the same bride. All right, so that is a pattern that we see. Application to the larger prophetic structure, the polygamy caused corruption, is a part of the reason the covenant woman is divorced, and on her death path, it necessitates Altaschith cries redemption, Genesis 3:15, michtam Eduthkha, that is the engraving to testimony, my testimony, all right, teaching, eventually restoration, as we see in Philadelphia assembly, and the covenant woman, Revelation chapter 12, traveling in birth pangs to bring forth the man child, because the covenant woman had to go through lot of turmoil, all right, because multiple husbands tried to bring in the corrupted seed, all right, tried to put the seed of corruption, but in all that rivalry, Yahuwah still chose a remnant, a small remnant out of them, all right, and brought forth uh, you know his transition form in the form of a son as Yahusha HaMashiach, all right, to that same womb from the remnant, all right. So when you read Deuteronomy chapter 17 verses 14 to 18, now these are the supporting verses. It says, when you come into the land with Yahuwah, your Elohim is giving you, and shall possess it, and shall dwell in it, and you shall say, let me set a sovereign over me like all the nations that are around me. You shall certainly set a sovereign over you, which is a king. Sovereign means king over you, whom Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose. Set a sovereign over you from among your brothers. You are not allowed to set a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he is not to increase horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Mitzrayim, that is Egypt, to increase horses. For Yahuwah has said to you, do not return that way. And he is not to increase wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor is he to greatly increase silver and gold for himself. And it shall be, when he sits on the throne of his reign, that he shall write for himself a copy of this Torah in a book from the one before the priests, the Levites. So that's how we see David's house was terribly affected by polygamy. All right, he himself had multiple wives, and in spite of that, he still, stole away Uriah's wife Bathsheba to bring forth Solomon. Solomon was more corrupt because his wife took him away from Yahuwah into idolatry, and he loved foreign wives. So this is the state that can happen, because he multiplied horses, he multiplied silver, everything that is written in Torah, he did contrary to that. So that is an example for us to learn from. Though Ecclesiastics was written by him, and Yahuwah had mercy upon him, okay, but these are for our admonishment. So you can read this later on. We are running out of time. We are already over 1 hour, and I'm going to stop right here on this slide and begin in the second part of this study, because I don't want to make it 2 hours or 3 hours. So I'll just break it down. So until I get back to you, please read 1 Kings chapter 10 verses 14 to 29, which talks about Solomon's wealth, silver and gold. I've selected passages from here, and 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 1 to 13, where Solomon's wives turn his heart away from following Yahuwah to other mighty gads. So until I see you in part 2, shalom, brethren.